Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Stan and today I'm going to walk you through what are the best settings for your camera if you want to do filming and if you want to obtain that cinematic video. I'm going to use the a7 IV as an example, but mainly this will apply for a7S III, for FX9 and so forth, all the Sony Alpha lineup. Who is this video for? This video is for beginners that do own a Sony Alpha camera, but they are now exploring the video capabilities or the filming capabilities of the a7 IV camera. If you had a Sony Alpha camera for quite a while and you're very happy with shooting stills, but now you're looking to explore more into filming, this video is for you. What are the basic things you should keep in mind when filming? This video is focused on sharing key points on few quantifiable factors that will help you get the best out of your camera in terms of footage quality, which can be easily learned and controlled. However, composition and lighting continue to remain the most important areas you should strive and look to improve and become a better videographer or photographer. When shooting with S-Cineton, the most important component you need to check continuously is the exposure. You want to get that exposure right, and every time your lighting condition changes, you need to make sure your exposure is spot on. For S-Cineton, according to Sony, the best results are obtained when the faces of your subjects are exposed between 60 and 65%. If you overexpose, then your footage becomes flat, which means the contrast decreases. If you underexpose, the footage gains contrast. Your contrast increases. What are the variables that influence your exposure? The variables that impact your exposure are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. I'm going to give you a high-level description of each of these variables, starting with shutter speed. Once you have decided the frames per second of your footage, that also dictates your shutter speed. So let's suppose you decided to film in 25 frames per second. Double that and then you'll get a 50th of a second. That would be your shutter speed. That would be your optimum shutter speed you should use for filming, a 50th of a second. Now let's assume you want to film at 50 frames per second or 60 frames per second. If you want to film at 50 frames per second, your recommended shutter speed should be a 100th of a second. If you want to film at 60 frames per second, your shutter speed would be 120, a 120th of a second. So we covered the shutter speed. That's the time your sensor is exposed to light. Now we have one variable that we know is constant throughout the frame. Moving on to the next variable, that's your aperture. Your aperture of your lens. So if the bigger the aperture, the more light reaches your sensor. But there is another aspect to that. Not just that. The larger the aperture, which translates in a lower f number, will also enable you to have a very shallow depth of field. Yes, a very shallow depth of field. If you go with a high f number, but with a small aperture in size, then your depth of field increases. So the more your f number increases or the smaller your aperture gets, your depth of field increases more. What I mean by depth of field is the portion of your frame that is in focus from your focus point. Usually you want to have a little bit in front and a little bit behind your focus point. In our case, we're talking focus points because in video for human subjects, I use face priority or face focus priority and eye detect. And Sony does a great job on that, and so does Canon and other latest cameras. Now they're all detecting the eyes. If you want to get that smooth out of focus background and good separation between your subject and your background, then you are bound to use a very large aperture, which translates into a very small f number. However, because you have your shutter speed already set and constant, but your aperture you want it as small as possible, if you are in natural light or outdoors, most likely there will be more than you need light available reaching your sensor than you need to hit that perfect exposure that we were talking earlier. So what do you do in that case? Well, there is one more variable. So you can decrease your ISO, which represents the sensitivity of your sensor to light. You can decrease that, but you decrease that up to a point you're still overexposing. In that case, you're using an ND filter. And the ND filter cuts the amount of light that reaches your sensor. ND, that's neutral density filter. Moving to the last variable that influences your exposure, that's ISO. Why I want to talk about ISO? If you watched my episode, how to set up your custom button in A7 IV, you know that I do have configured a direct way to quickly access and modify my ISO when filming. Though I keep it on auto for stills, I want to be able to quickly modify my ISO when I'm filming. There's a reason for arranging control of ISO being at my fingertips, and that is base ISO. Base ISO, it's the value of the ISO in each of the camera where you get that maximum range or the maximum quality, video quality between the highlights and the shadows. Base ISO differs from sensor to sensor and from picture profile to picture profile. For example, for an A7S III, your low S-Cinetone base is at ISO 100, with high S-Cinetone base at 2000. While if you use S-Log3, your low base ISO is at 640, with high S-Log3 ISO at 12800. Why would you want to usually be around or close as possible to your base ISO? That's where your camera sensor can deliver the widest range of sensor sensitivity to light, known as dynamic range. In order to obtain the best results using your S-Cinema picture profile, you should always attempt to have the exposure correctly. So you want to strike that balance for S-Cinetone. You want to make sure the exposure is correct. According to Sony, the best results when filming human subjects are obtained when you expose the skin tones of your subjects to 65%. What tools in your A7 IV are available to you that provide you information and feedback around the exposure of 65%? And the answer is Zebra Level. In A7 IV, I'm using the Zebra Level to assist me in making sure the skin tones of my subjects are exposed to 65%. It can be between 60 and 65%, so just remember this number, between 60 and 65%. We're now going to look in the menu and where can you find this. So if you go to exposure and color, the last item in there, it's going to be your Zebra display. So exposure, Zebra display. You enable Zebra display, so Zebra display on, and then you go to Zebra Level. In Zebra Level, you have two custom options. You have two customizable values. Personally, I use the lower limit and then I put 65% plus. What does it mean if I'm using the lower level option? If I'm using the lower level option for my custom level 2 for a Zebra display, that means as soon as the exposure is over 65%, the Zebra display level would be enabled on that area. What is my feedback in this case? I'm looking at the subject faces, and if around them is Zebra but on their faces there are no Zebra display, that means their faces is under 65%. Is it perfectly accurate? No, because it can be more than just 5% less, which we want between 60 and 65. But as long as I keep around them Zebra, that means I'm very close to the limit of 65 and the face is little under 65 while the rest of the frame can be over 65. Yes? Now, there is another way that can give you better accuracy, but there is a trade-off, and that is choosing the standard plus range model for the Zebra level configuration. So if we look now, this is the standard plus range, and my range is between 63, but I'm doing plus minus 5. So I'm setting the level at 63 and then I'm saying plus minus 5. That gives me exactly that range, 60 to 65. In these particular settings, I will need to make sure my subject's faces are always Zebra's display on their faces. So it's a reverse logic. Personally, I'm preferring the first option I mentioned with lower limit because I want to see the faces of the subjects clearly in my footage. Either way you choose, either way you prefer, what you want to achieve, what your final goal should be, is to keep your subject faces exposed between 60 and 65%. And this is one of the many ideas that you can control and give yourself some feedback to make sure you are exposing your subject faces correctly in S-Cinematron. Okay, so we touched upon shutter speed, we touched upon aperture, and we touched upon ISO. There's one more component you should be aware of when filming, and that is stabilization. With A7 IV, Sony is bringing various flavors of stabilization. You have a better in-body stabilization, which is 5.5 stops now, compared to the predecessor, which was only 5 stops. And you can sense a difference to A7 III, but that's not usually enough for filming. So you can enable your active stabilization, which is a stabilization performed in software and has a trade-off. You get a crop on the sensor. The actual footage will have a smaller area of the sensor. However, you can also use post-production stabilization. To use post-production stabilization with software like Sony Catalyst, you must have the camera recording the gyro and lens data as metadata into the video files. That can be done only when you turn off the steady shot in the menu, because otherwise that data is not accurate. Personally, I still believe using a gimbal is the best overall option as of now for a perfect steady footage. Lastly, is the file format you're saving the files to your storage environment, to your SD card. As of now, December 2021, adoption of H.265 codec is still very limited in regards of playing capabilities of various devices. Therefore, I'm still recommending using the H.264 codec for now, for 2 reasons. Backwards compatibility, and also secondly, you will find that you end up losing time with conversion in post-processing more than what you gain in the storage volume you save using the more efficient, when it comes to compression, codec H.265. We will have a dedicated video on Sony video file formats. Thus, if you are interested, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It is a free, easy and quick way to support this channel and also encourage the creation of more videos like this one. I'd like to thank you for your time.